that would be great as well. So we can commemorate this activity.
Good evening, everyone. We are here live, Black in Marine Science. My name is Dr. Camille Gaynus. I am the board chair of the organization. I am here with Dr. Boyd, Dr. Kandis Boyd, and Mr. Vince Leggett. And today we're going to be talking about a lot of different things. The Chesapeake Bay, the fusions between the atmosphere and the ocean, as well as just Black joy in marine science. Dr. Boyd, so excited for you to be here, so excited to talk with you and delve into your journey as a scientist and some of the challenges, some of the successes you have had, as well as advice that you've had for other marine scientists. You have a stellar resume. You've worked at NOAA, you've worked at NSF, you've worked at the EPA, you have done a variety of things. You have been the first African-American female to graduate from Iowa State with a degree in meteorology, which is nothing to snuff about. And we're going to be talking about, I have some questions about all of those, but I just want to take the floor and open it to you to just talk and introduce yourself in a little bit more detail.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Gaynus, and thank you to everyone who's joining us on a Friday evening to learn a little bit about BIMS and some of the topics that we're talking about today. I am so honored to be a part of this discussion. So let me start with my standard introduction. My name is Kandis Boyd. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I bring you greetings from the Washington, D.C. area. And I want to acknowledge the indigenous tribes and sovereign nations on which I sit today, which include the Mattaponi tribe, the Pamunkey tribe, in the Washington, D.C. area. So I'm so glad to be here today. And as Dr. Gaynus said, yes, I am a bit of a fossil. I've been in the federal government my entire career, starting at the age of 19. And next year, I'm proud to say I will celebrate 30 years of federal government service. So I've worked in several different agencies, but today I just want to talk to you and come to you as Kandis, a person who has been in this space. My background is meteorology and also hydrology. I have degrees in water resources. I have degrees in meteorology. I also have certificates in project management as well. And I've used all of those throughout my career to advance myself in different spaces and places. And I'm really looking forward to today's conversation to just talk about how we can continue to move forward in terms of Blacks in marine sciences. So thank you again for the opportunity, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Boyd. We also are joined by Mr. Vince Leggett, founder and CEO of Blacks of the Chesapeake. And I just have to say, this man is one of a kind in the best way. Mr. Leggett, or Vinny from Baltimore, as I've heard you introduce yourself a number of times, I would just like you to just go into a bit more detail about who you are, the organization Blacks of the Chesapeake, and why you're here today.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gaynus, and say hi to my good friend, Dr. Kandis Boyd. We've shared spaces together. We've shared meals together. We've shared challenges together, particularly in the space that we work in, particularly here on the Chesapeake Bay and the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia triangle. And again, the Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in North America. It stretches from where the Atlantic Ocean comes into the Chesapeake Bay, and it's a 200-mile journey due north up to the Susquehanna River, and the Chesapeake Bay represents a 64,000 square mile watershed. And the tip of it is up in Cooperstown, New York, where the Little League Hall of Fame is. But I was born in Baltimore, and as Dr. Camille says, I'm a country boy from East Baltimore, and both of my parents were born in the Carolinas, and they went to Fayetteville Teachers College. in the 1940s, and both for training elementary education. But the good news is every summer I was shipped back down the country and worked in cotton and peanuts and sugarcane and hunted and fished. And that gave me an early land-based experience, but a great contrast to the grit and grime of East Baltimore. With the Blacks of the Chesapeake, it's through those experiences that I developed a passion for people, passion for green spaces and brown spaces. And as a result, eventually started a Blacks of the Chesapeake project that evolved into a foundation. And our main purpose is elevating and bringing voice about the contributions Blacks have made to the maritime and seafood processing industry. So I'll just stop there, and I reserve the right to speak again, if that's okay, Ms. Moderator, and just knock the ball back to you.
Yes, yes. I just want to change a little bit and just talk about the connections between the both of you. I think when we're talking about this movement, especially with everything going on today, right? In the Supreme Court justice, nullifying basically affirmative action. I think the community of scholars is very important. And even just me being here, it's because of a community of Black marine scientists. It's Dr. Moore, who I've known for quite some time, who really looped me into this community. And Vince, you talked about how Dr. Boyd, and I just want to take some time and hear from both of you about just that journey, how you all met one another, some of the challenges that you both had to face in your work, especially in the Chesapeake Bay. And so, Dr. Boyd, we will start with you.
Okay, sure. So anyone who knows the name Vince Leggett knows that he is a living, walking icon. And so I knew of Vince Leggett before I met Vince Leggett. So the actual first meeting, if I want to call it that, was at the Elktonia Car beach signing. And so for those, now actually Brother Leggett can tell you all about that. But what I remember was that I literally found out about that activity maybe a couple of days before from a colleague. And he said, yeah, you should come. And I'm the type of person that believes in FOMO, fear of missing out. So I said, I don't want to miss out on this. I want to go. And what I remember about Vince Leggett is that there were all types of people there. You literally had people from the governor's office. You had people who were senators there. You had people who were multi-million-dollar contributors. And he took the moment to just say hi, say, how are you doing? And, he welcomed me because I was new to my position. And that's what I remember about Vince Leggett, is that the icon, the person that we know as Vince Leggett, took some time just to say hi and just to be friendly. And that always stuck with me. And then from there, we built a friendship. And like Mr. Leggett said, we started seeing each other in different spaces and places. And I said, I've got to, put this into a larger space. And so for Black History Month, we both served on a panel together. And it was not just the two of us, but it was also minorities in aquaculture. It was also the USDA. But what we wanted to do is provide a perspective, because representation matters. And we wanted to show that there are so many of us in different spaces and places. And unfortunately, some of us are the only one in some of these spaces and places. So we wanted to talk about some of the commonalities, some of the challenges that we've encountered, but then also talk about some of the successes and what we're looking forward to, and also to highlight that we are not a monolith, that you can't just talk to one person and assume that you know everything about the Chesapeake Bay or African Americans or Blacks in marine sciences. So that's just a little bit of the background of what I've come to know and to appreciate about Vince Leggett, and that he is a living, walking icon, and he continues to move the needle forward when it comes to Blacks of the Chesapeake. So Vince, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, and what I remember from that day, it was August 22nd, and I could just see the Chesapeake Bay sparkling. I could hear the seagulls squawking, and I can see Dr. Kandis Boyd coming down the runway, which was a sandy beach. And this Elktonia Cars Beach was part of a 180-acre tract of land that a Mr. Fred Carr amassed in 1902. Just think about it, 1902. And that's an important date because one thing I found from my research on the Chesapeake Bay, Blacks, Browns, and limited resource people lived on the water's edge. That provided them subsistence fishing. It was considered low bottom land, high reeds and high mosquitoes, and more resource people were upland. And so just to look at that whole context, almost 60-some years after Emancipation Proclamation, and here's a Black man owning 180 acres on the Chesapeake Bay, and they went on to create two of the most fabulous beaches, Carrs and Sparrows Beach, which were part of the Chitlin Circuit, listed in the Green Book. Again, and this project, Blacks of the Chesapeake, and this particular work that Dr. Boyd is making reference to, is just looking at leisure, recreation, and entertainment during a period of segregation. We had to have our own because we did not have access to majority facilities. Parks, pools, playgrounds, golf courses, just places where we could recreate and no one could tell you to sit down or stand up, and you didn't have to face the humiliation of colored only signs or know this or know that. And to see Dr. Boyd becoming the EPA representative in this Chesapeake Bay was a monumental step. And I pledged to her that day, is any way that I could help, count me, and we put each other on speed dial. And she is follow up, follow up, follow up. And that's a good thing because many times we as African Americans don't have a safety net. That people, they do have a high expectation for us. And the truth is everyone is not pulling for our success. And that's the reality of the spaces that we operate in.
So much truth there, so much truth that both of you just said. Mr. Leggett, I just want to go back on a couple of things that you talked about. I'm going to be, and I think I've told you this, the history of Elktonia and Carr's Beach was new to me until I met you. Consistently learning about the accomplishments of Black people, even historically, right? When we think about some of these monumental things that have been done. I mean, buying 180 acres, even today, that is nothing to snuff at. And I just want to talk and hear from you about the relationship between Elktonia Beach and Blacks of the Chesapeake. I know that you guys have done quite a bit there in that region and in Annapolis, preserving some of that culture, also making sure that other peoples know about that history.
Well, one thing I found out in my public life, people don't want to know what you did in kindergarten. They want to know what you did yesterday. And let me tell you what I did today. I had a meeting with representatives from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. It was about 15 of them. And I gave them a tour of Elktonia Beach. And I had one African-American female as a part of the 15-person delegation from a state agency. And we kind of gave each other the thumbs up, just a little bit of assurance, because we were all ready. We acknowledge each other. When we go to the movies or the supermarket, we are trained to acknowledge. And so that was just so comforting to both of us. But we were really looking at different strategies to preserve the beaches, to restore the land, just the relationship. And one of the things I emphasized to that delegation is that this 5 acres that we were able to wrestle from a developer cost $6.4 million. And the governor gave the Blacks of the Chesapeake a $1.2 million grant toward the purchase. The rest of the partners don't say it as loudly as I say it, but for an NGO, a non-government organization working with local, state, and federal partners, for NGO, an African-American NGO with Black in the title. So we aren't this, we are Blacks of the Chesapeake. It's on the t-shirts, it's on the website, so you don't have to guess who we are. And emphasize that point because I know that we have the intelligence and the agency to tell our own story. And I just think that that's just so important in the spaces that we operate. Dr. Boyd talked about the Native and Indigenous people. They have the intelligence and the lived experience to tell their own story. We as African Americans, if you give us the resources, we can tell our own story. And furthermore, I would say we are the original conservationists because we didn't have anything left over to discard. I mean, we had to recycle everything in our spaces because we did not have leisure time, leisure money, leisure income. We always lived on the margins. And so my grandmother would keep a Luzerne coffee can on the side of her stove with bacon drippings on it. And she would cook crab cakes with bacon drippings. And I was doing one lecture, someone said, Mr. Leggett, what are bacon drippings? And I said, the stuff in the Luzerne coffee can on my grandmama's stove. And so again, that was part of my day earlier. And hopefully your audience can appreciate that. And either you can sound off, again, just talking about our ability to interpret and have the agency to tell our own story.
Yes, so important, so important. If you are just joining us, my name is Dr. Camille Gaynus. I am the board chair of Black and Marine Science. We are talking with Dr. Kandis Boyd and Mr. Vince Leggett about a variety of things, coastal ecosystems, the atmosphere, as well as Black marine joy. Dr. Boyd, I want to go back to your educational and professional journey. I think it's so interesting that you have fusioned meteorology and the climate and the ocean and our hydrology systems. And I just wanted to hear from you about how you got interested in your journey to that area of research.
Yeah, well, I tell everyone I'm where I am because of a farmer. And so, as I mentioned earlier in our discussion, we're not a monolith, and each of us has a different story, and each of us needs to tell it. So, give me a couple minutes, and I'll try and condense 30 years into a couple of minutes.
We give you more than a couple minutes.
Okay,
more than a couple minutes.
All right. Well, sit back, get comfortable. Here's my story. I'm actually from Chicago, Illinois. Both of my parents are teachers, and this is back in the 70s. I'm not ashamed to say that, I'm in my late 40s and I'll be hitting 50 real soon. 50 is closer than 40. I'll leave it at that. And so in that day and time, there was this preconceived notion that the suburbs had better opportunities than the inner city. So my parents moved from the inner city to the suburbs, and we moved to a town called Park Forest South. Now, what was happening in the suburbs of Chicago was that people were moving to the suburbs, and all of these subdivisions and new cities were literally popping up on the map. And they were buying out farms in the southern suburbs. Well, they started buying up these farms. They started creating these subdivisions, all except for one, which was called Regal Farm. And Regal Farm refused to sell. So what actually happened over time was that you literally had subdivisions growing around this one farm. Now, you would think that maybe the farm or the owners would start to develop negative feelings about all these subdivisions that were growing up around them. But instead, Regal Farm was proactive and they were forward thinking. And they started creating educational programs for the young and the youth that were growing up in these communities. Programs like, how do you get food to your table? How do you take care of livestock? What does it mean to, harvest? What does it mean to detassel? Different things like that. And believe it or not, my parents wanted me to be a part of that. I literally grew up steps from Regal Farm. And so I spent a lot of my summers either with relatives, but in some cases when I was home, I would walk to Regal Farm and I would be a part of these educational programs. And that's where my love of, and I'm going to use air quotes, the environment started. I say air quotes because I don't know if it was called the environment or environmental science at the time. I just know I love being outdoors. I loved learning about what's going on in the world. And I started having an appreciation of weather. And so as a result, I finished my high school education. I was the salutatorian of my class, number 2 in my class, and I received a 4-year scholarship to Iowa State University, and I studied agricultural meteorology. And if it wasn't for that farmer, I wouldn't have thought about agricultural meteorology as a major. So I pursued an undergraduate degree in agricultural meteorology as a result of the George Washington Carver Scholarship Program. And side note, George Washington Carver, most people know him because of all of his groundbreaking work with Tuskegee University and all of his work with agriculture. But what many may not know was that he was the very first African-American to attend Iowa State University. So in his honor, they created a scholarship. I was a scholarship recipient, and I was able to attend Iowa State University because of George Washington Carver. So after 4 years, I tell everyone, I walked across the stage. I received my degree in meteorology with a minor in speech communication. That was a Saturday, and I started as a research assistant the following Monday. So how did I get to graduate school? Well, there was another fellowship program similar to George Washington Carver, a man by the name of Ronald McNair. Now, if you don't know Ronald McNair, Google him, but I can tell you, Ronald McNair, he was a physicist and he was an astronaut, and he was a part of the Challenger crew. Now, many of you know where the story is going, because in 1986, the Challenger unexpectedly exploded minutes into its flight, and every person on that shuttle perished. And as a result, his foundation created a fellowship program for individuals who wanted to go into the STEM arena. So my undergraduate studies were funded by the George Washington Carver Scholarship. My graduate studies were funded by the Ronald E. McNair Fellowship Program. So I tell people today that representation matters, and it's because of these 2 extraordinary individuals that I'm here today. So that's just a little bit about my journey and how I started in the federal government. But, let's pause for a second, because like I said, I know we have a whole hour, but I want to make sure that we answer or get to all questions. And then I can talk to you a little bit more about how I started with my career and how that turned into a 30-year career in STEM.
So I have a follow-up question,
Sure.
Dr. Boyd, just on what you talked about.
Mhm.
I think this idea that you talked about the exposure, right, to the environment, but also being exposed to alternate professions. I know myself, I grew up in a household where you wanted to be professionally successful, you would be a lawyer, right? You would be a medical doctor. Those were just what you did. So being a marine scientist, and when I started to delve down that path, was like completely new. And you talked about how you found that there was something else out there for you on your own, right? I want to talk about this idea of when you have people's excluded, right? You need to make sure that they are exposed to these areas, to these professions, so that you have more understanding, so that you can diversify, because that's really where it starts. And I just want to talk to you about those, more detail about that whole journey for you. Also your support system as you went through undergraduate, right, and graduate schools.
Absolutely. So you tend to perpetuate what you know. So it's no secret that both of my parents were teachers, and I have a love for teaching in some way, shape, or form. And when you talk to most people, they tend to enter a career or a career field based on the people that are closest around them. So what you said is absolutely true, that representation matters. And then the flip side of that is we need to create more programs and more activities to expose the next generation to the wealth of careers that are out there. I think I read a statistic, and somebody can Google me and fact check me, but 30% of the jobs that we're expecting in 2030, so that's only a few years down the road, haven't even been invented yet. Let me say that again. So 30% of the careers that we're expecting to have in 2030 haven't even been invented yet. So what does that mean? Well, you have people in middle school, you have people in high school, you even have people in college who are preparing for careers, and there's all these opportunities for them that they may not know about if they're not exposed to it on some way, shape, or form. So going back to what you said, it's the onus is on us to expose this next generation. And I'm going to actually say the current generation in some ways as well, to what's on the horizon so that we can have a diverse, inclusive society that truly represents not only the societies that we serve, but also the populations that we're growing as well.
Yes, yes, yes.
Dr. Camille, I'd like to tag team on that a little bit. Again, I talked about what I did today. Let me tell you what I did yesterday. I met a young African-American who is doing an internship with the University of Maryland's environmental program over in Eastport near your former office, Dr. Boyd. And I told him that pound for pound, for the dollars I have left and the years I have left, I'm putting my money on the fourth grader. And I said, I'm not going to be trying to flip grandmamas or disinterested teenagers. And he was just so disappointed. He said, Vince, what about me? He has a background in oceanography, graduated from the University of Florida, doing an internship. He's going to his second year in environmental stuff at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And when I said I'm going all the way down to the fourth grader, because I was that fourth grader that somebody said, this little guy, little Vinny has potential. That's what they told my mother in kindergarten. And that means he's not doing well. When they tell your mama in kindergarten that your baby have potential, that's really not a good report card. But again, so I see about exposure, and people really need to see one to be one. So I really just wanted to just tag team and web with Dr. Boyd's response and just add a little bit of my recent episode down that road, and maybe that might help spur some more conversation with us.
Yeah. Excellent point. And just to piggyback on what Brother Leggett said, if we wait for someone to start figuring out what they want to do in college, we failed them. Okay. What we are learning is that we really need to dive into the K through 12 curriculum. And when I say dive in, and yes, I'm using that word on purpose, it's more than, exactly,
Dr. Boyd.
Yes, it's more than just high school. I mean, I dare say it's more than just middle school. It's that we need to start exposing the next generation as early as elementary school to some of these budding careers that are out there. And, you know, again, it like Mr. Leggett said, didn't he say fourth grade? So someone was able to see that he had potential in fourth grade. And so the question to me is, what are we doing to tap into those fourth graders? How many fourth graders do we have, you know, across, you know, the country, not just the Chesapeake Bay, that could benefit from someone saying, you know, you have potential, and I think you would be great in this particular area. Because the flip side of it is college education is not going to decrease in terms of price. It keeps increasing every single year. And so if we're waiting for someone to wait until they get to college to figure out what they actually want to do, yes, they probably will find a budding career, but it will be at a higher price tag because they're spending more time trying to figure it out as opposed to being exposed to some of these activities at an earlier age.
Completely agree. And even another part of that flip side, right, is them being written off at such a young age. I feel like they know, like younger people, they understand that, and that influences them into their adulthood, into their educational trajectories. I think that to combat that, we have to have exposure. We have to show them there are so many other opportunities so they can find what they want, like find things that interest them. And we do live in a society right now where there are so many different areas that you can go into as a professional.
Absolutely. And I'm really proud of BIMS, Blacks in Marine Sciences, because that's what I'm seeing you do in so many different spaces and places. Just a month ago, there was the Little Mermaid premiere, and I was so proud to see you all connect BIMS to something that was very likable or very relatable to our youth. And I believe you had a premiere in Virginia, Hampton, if I'm correct. Trust me, I was trying to get there, but you know, but I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. And so the point is that making those connections is really important. So going back to what Brother Leggett said, you know, trying to help people understand the historical importance of Blacks in the Chesapeake Bay is highly important, because that's how our next generation can say, well, you know, there's people who have been a part of this legacy for over 100 years, and so can I. And so that's what we need to do, is find ways to connect the historical perspective or the scientific perspective, but helping people understand that they matter and they are a part of this conversation.
Yes, yes, yes. Agreed completely, completely. If you are just joining us, my name is Dr. Camille Gaynus. I am the board chair of Black and Marine Science. I am here talking with Dr. Kandis Boyd and Mr. Vince Leggett. We are talking about a variety of things. I do want to ask you some specific questions about the Chesapeake Bay, because I know you both have professional experiences there in that region. If you are just joining us, please, please, please put in the chat, ask your questions on the YouTube. We will answer them a little bit later, if not right away, depending on when we get them. But please be involved. We want this to be a two-way street. I just want to talk and hear from both of you all, and you've kind of touched a little bit, but what is the importance of the Chesapeake Bay to you? What did you find during your professional experiences, your personal experiences? Why is this bay important?
Well, I can start. I was born and raised in Chicago, like I said, so I am not a Marylander, but I got to Maryland as soon as I could. And I'm embarrassed to say this, but I really didn't start learning about the Chesapeake Bay until I had a position that directly related to the Chesapeake Bay. So I lived in the Chesapeake Bay, and I didn't really know a lot of the activities that were going on. And I say that because I represent so many of the 17 million individuals who live in the Chesapeake Bay and the watershed, as Brother Leggett mentioned. That encompasses not just Maryland and Virginia, but an additional 4 states and the District of Columbia, from New York, as we mentioned, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Delaware, as well. And so we really want to make sure that we acknowledge and appreciate everyone who lives in the Chesapeake Bay, and also realize that we all have a voice, and that we all can be a part of the change that we want to see, not only in the Bay, but then also in the world. Because what we're learning so much is that it's not just about the Bay, but it's having a global awareness of marine science, estuary science, environmental science, call it what you want. The point is that we no longer can just sit in our house and think that we can't be a part of the solution. And so it's little things from recycling to just having a better awareness of what goes on in the Chesapeake Bay, to, again, supporting so many causes. And there are over 600 different organizations in the Chesapeake Bay that are all working to move this movement forward. So I say all that to say that we really need to just realize that we all are a part of the solution, but that also means that we all need to do our part to be a part of the solution.
And what I would say is that even in my background, I'm a K-16 educator. I've run 2 multi-million-dollar housing corporations. I worked at the Department of Natural Resources for 10 years. But parallel, I've been developing Blacks of the Chesapeake. On June 26th, I know I look good, but I just turned 70. And at 70, when I see the check engine light on, I pull over, and I'm not talking about my car. I'm talking about me. And so again, what I would say is I work with every alphabet organization on the Chesapeake Bay. And as Dr. Boyd said, there are tens and tens of them, federal, local, state, and community-based. And what I say is that this bay is your bay, this bay is our bay. In a lot of the spaces that I work on, whether it's Martin Luther King Boulevard in Chicago, New York, DC, Philadelphia, or LA, all of our towns have a Martin Luther King Boulevard. And what I say is, even though they may not come into brown spaces or blue spaces, they are a part of this ecosystem. The Chesapeake Bay is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's not people that look like myself or Dr. Boyd in leadership and decision-making positions. And I do believe that people need to see one to be one. And it's okay to be on the Wheaties box, Michael Jordan jumping in the air, or Tiger Woods swinging a golf club, but to see people in the supermarket, in the restaurant, in the laundromat. I mean, those, I think, have a bigger impact in terms of people seeing, I can get there, I can reach out, I can touch. I just think it's just so important. And what I try to show is not only the historical aspect of the Bay, but as I walked the halls of the Maryland legislature, I was on Capitol Hill with the Interior Department and the White House Office of Environmental Quality. And so even the legislators, our intelligentsia, our talented TIF, need just as much education as the fourth grader up on Martin Luther King Boulevard. And some policy leaders or elected officials might find it painful to hear, but I'm speaking the truth because they really haven't been exposed to these spaces. And what I try to do is present more of the economic impact and the economic benefit, because if they think it's some greeny issue, save the fish, save the tree, when those are not the constituent calls they're getting, is equal justice under the law, healthcare, housing, education. Those are the calls that come into their district office. So again, but if we look at the economic impact, the careers you talked about, Dr. Boyd, that haven't been invented yet, the Domino Sugars and the McCormick Spice and international trade. I mean, these are multi-billion-dollar industries, and those are future-looking career opportunities.
Yes. So we have a question from the audience, and I'm going to read the question first and then kind of give my perspective and amend it a little bit and then throw it back to you all. The question is, what about adults who can vote and make decisions now? That can affect these fourth graders. Are they not important to reach out to? I think when we're talking about issues in our society, it's a multi-generational conversation, right? You have to get not just young people involved, not just folks who are middle age and our elders. You have to have them all coming together, talking with one another, experiencing it, and then being a part of different solutions. I think I'm a marine scientist. I study the ocean, which is huge. There's no one way that's going to solve the issues, right? It's a multitude of solutions that we can employ. I can't employ them all, right? So it's going to take people. And I think approaching it from this multi-generational impact, this perspective is very important. I want to hear from both of you all about ways that you would like to see different peoples of different ages coming together to be a part of ocean conservation, conservation of the bay, conservation of our environment, but also ways and projects that you have been involved in that have multi-generational peoples involved. And we can start with you, Dr. Boyd.
Sure. I think there's a saying that says, if you don't have a seat at the table, then chances are you're on the menu. And I think that's something that we really have to think about. all of us need to have a voice and all of us need to have a seat at the table. So of course that looks different depending on the conversation, but all of us should have a role in the future of marine science, or like you said, ocean science. Call it what you want. But the point is this, is that we need more than just scientists. And I know that that's a little, against the grain to say to BIMS.
It's not,
Okay.
it is very much not.
Well, I'm so glad that you have Brother Leggett here, because again, we need people who understand communications. We need people who are historians. We need people who, yes, have a background in STEM, science, technology, and I should say STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, which I know is the new term that most people are using. But the point is that you need to have people from a variety of backgrounds. And sometimes when we talk about diversity, some people are limited by what they see: age, race, gender. And my complement to that is, yes, that's where it starts. And then it also needs to go into a different space in terms of our experiences, our education, and then also our careers as well. And then once we have those individuals all at the table, I think we can truly have a holistic conversation on the future direction.
I'm just going to interject very quickly.
Mhm.
Black and Marine Science was started by a group of scientists.
Awesome.
We quickly realized, though, that for us to be as successful as we are today, we needed more than just scientists to be a part of the conversation, right? So going back to your point, Dr. Boyd, there were things, and I'll be completely transparent. If you go back a couple generations of the organization, I was the chief financial officer. We now have accountants,
Yes.
right? Like, because that's not my area of expertise. Like, that's not what I've been trained to do. And so what you're talking about, we need more than just the scientists, right, to be a part of these larger conversations when we're talking about conserving our oceans, conserving our coastlines. Vince, I'll open the floor to you.
Yes, and I think that that's very important. And even going back to, I'll keep going back to that fourth grader because I'm channeling myself. And what I see is exposure, exposure, exposure. I worked at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources for 10 years, and I thought everybody in that building were scientists. I bothered not to even apply or ring the doorbell. When I got there, they had over 200 job descriptions that weren't scientists. Finance people, photographers, journalists, mathematicians, draftmen, communications, liaison to the governor, liaison to this. And again, our people, Blacks and Browns, limited resource people, would walk past that building every day and not ring the doorbell. But it was through the fact that in the early beginnings of the Chesapeake Bay program, and I've worked with 5 governors and 4 or 5 governors, and they were trying to get the legislative Black caucus, and Maryland has more members of their legislative caucus than any other state in the union, little old Maryland. Mm-hmm. And again, they summarily dismissed me because the governor said, Vince, we need those guys and girls votes from inside the beltways, inside the DC beltway, inside the Baltimore beltway. But the Department of Natural Resources didn't have assets in those spaces. Their assets were out in the mountains and down at Ocean City. There was nothing where the people were. And again, so I decided not to write a white paper. I wrote a Black paper called Blacks of the Chesapeake. And I just think that as we look at higher order thinking and those that us that are more gifted, we need to leave a written record that we were here. We've all here fancy speakers, fancy dancers, but where is the written record that that 4th grader can come and amend to weave to build upon? And I think that's the responsibility that we have as community leaders and thought shapers.
Agreed completely. I just want to just take a moment, Mr. Leggett, and talk about some of the things that you harped on. In particular, this idea that as Black peoples, right, when we are navigating spaces that, let's be honest, were never meant for us to be successful in, right? We automatically can self-exclude ourselves. If we don't see, Dr. Boyd, like you talked about, right, ourselves, representation matters. And so when we're talking about how Black peoples even enter into these spaces and see their futures, if they can't even see themselves, right? When going back to you, right, talking about you wouldn't even apply because you thought, oh, it's all scientists. That's not my area of expertise. But that's not necessarily true, right? I just want to take a second and hear from both of you on if you could, and Mr. Leggett, you've talked multiple times about, your fourth grade self, but giving some advice to overcome those challenges to your younger self. What would you say? What would be some thoughts, some ideals that you would plan in your mind? And clearly you guys have done amazing things from a mental standpoint to maintain, to advance yourself and other people's, which is very important. And so, Dr. Boyd, I will hand it over to you, some advice for your younger self.
I think if I could go back and talk to my younger self, I would say it all works out in the end. I think that I spent so much of my career and my youth caring about what others thought about me. And I can't tell you how emotionally draining that is. How many times I had to code speak, code switch, just spend so much time thinking about whether or not what I'm saying is going to help me get to that next step. And so I can't speak for anyone else, but I think that when I turned 40, it was definitely an epiphany because I'm not going to say I stopped caring, but I think I started caring more what Kandis thought. Because at the end of the day, it's Kandis. I am in a race against Kandis to be a better Kandis than anyone else. So I'm not really competing against the person to my left or my right. I'm trying to be a better person. And I think once I had that epiphany and things shifted, life became easier. And it's just like, they say this all the time that, the pieces just started falling in place. And maybe it's because I didn't spend so much time thinking about all that other stuff. So if I could go back to my younger self, it all works out. It really does. But I would tell people that I think I was my biggest critic and, just know that, you can do anything that you put your mind to. I know it's so cliche. I know we hear it all the time, but I think that we have to get that voice out of your head that it can't be done and say instead, how can it be done? And I think that's the shift that we all need. So I'll turn it over to Brother Leggett.
Before we go to Mr. Leggett, Dr. Boyd, you said some amazing things there. What does Kandis want? Professionally wise, what are those things you just talked about? You've been thinking, like, what are those aspects of your professional life that you would like to see? And how are you navigating those spaces?
I've been in the federal government space my entire career. And like I said, I'm on the cusp of 30 years. So I think my shift has changed to the next generation, especially in the federal government. We need to create a pipeline of future enthusiasts. And it's more than just, again, marine scientists. It's people who are interested in having a career in the federal government. So you asked, what does Kandis want? I want people to not go through what I went through. Because while it is impressive to read my bio and all the things that I've done, I can also say that for every success I've had, I've probably had 3 or 4 failures. And success and failure to me are 2 sides of the same coin. And so many times we only talk about the success, we don't talk about the failures. And I think that we tend to perpetuate this inaccurate depiction of what a career looks like. Most people that I know have gone through twists and turns, road blocks, road bumps, stops, starts, all that good stuff. But when they talk to you, they only talk to you about the success. And so what does Kandis want? I think we need to just broaden the conversation. So going back to the fourth grade, younger Vince Leggett, it's to say, yes, you can do anything that you put your mind to, but also realize that with every success, there's going to be challenges along the way. And we need to learn to prepare this next generation to prepare for the successes, also to prepare for the failures, and then how the two of them intermix throughout your career.
Yes, I think having conversations like this and going back to this multi-generational conversation, right? Because it's through these conversations that you realize your path. You can kind of foresee some of the successes you might have, but also paired with the challenges, like I am a firm believer the path that I'm walking, I'm not the first one to do it, right? There have been other Black peoples, maybe they haven't been documented, right? They have done this. And so talking with them, having the opportunity to do that is golden. As I move forward, as I move through this world, hearing their experiences, them providing me some advice, even people who might be younger than me, right? They might still be in a different space profession-wise. Understanding that is vital, Vince, I will pass the floor over to you. Some advice for your younger self.
This is what I would say. I'm in the process of working on my memoirs and playing around with the title. And it's Be Good Help. Be Good Help. This is a lesson I learned from my granddaddy, Arthur Smith. He had 7 sons and my mama. So you couldn't fool her. My daddy found that out soon and they called her sister. So she was old school with 7 dudes. But that was 7 guys that my grandfather didn't have to hire on his tobacco farm. And he had a straw hat with a green visor in the front. And every summer when I went down to North Carolina, he had one of those for me. He was Big Kingfish and I was Little Kingfish. He made me think that I was somebody. I mean, and what he said is, Vince, be good help. And what I walked in that spirit and in that mantra because the system protects good health. I mean, whether that is the 4th grader or Dr. Boyd, if you are the secretary of something or the head of EPA, or Dr. Boyd, with your work at UCLA or your work at Hampton or the space you're in now as a chief science officer, be good health. And what I think that means is you'll get exposure, but nobody's trying to make you a basketball player or make you a football player, expose you to it. And when you find your passion, find your sweet spot, and you might go through several iterations, but wherever you go, be good health. And it was just something about being good health. So that's what I would pass along. And what I would say briefly is, I'm a substitute teacher at an alternative middle school, grades 6 through 8. And this is the last school on the block. You've been put out everywhere else. And what I say with these young people is that, one, that is somebody in their world is keeping them coming back. They're on a 46-passenger bus with a driver and a driver's aide on a bus for 2 hours, but they're still coming. The second point I find with young people is there's no words any of us have to scare them. Go to jail, get shot, get killed, save your breath. That's not moving the needle. And the third thing I say is they know truth, because in their world, it's no do-overs. So again, be good help.
We are nearing the end of our time, but we do have a slew of questions here, and I'm just going to pick 2 and provide them to each of you. And so this first one, I'm going to pose to you, Mr. Leggett. Can you talk a little bit just about the history of African Americans in the Bay and how that affects the population of African Americans you see today in that region?
Well, real quickly, what I would say is the African Americans have a rich history in the Bay. If you go to any public library, college, or university and flip through books on the Chesapeake Bay, very seldom you see people look like me or us. If you do see them, the caption says crab picker or oyster shucker. Well, we write books and curriculum guides, and this is the title of my book, The Chesapeake Bay Through Ebony Eyes. We write books, we do school curriculum, we do documentary films, because we've been involved in all aspects of the maritime and seafood industry, and either our stories were ignored or erased. And rather than sitting around talking about what the man is doing, we need to get to stepping and use our intellect and use our networks and generate our own literature. They're snatching books off of school shelves. For every one they snatch off, we need to write another one.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Boyd, our last question for tonight. How do different peoples from different states, how are they connected to the Chesapeake Bay? I just want you to take some time. Like you stated, right? You were from Detroit, or I'm sorry, Chicago.
Yes.
And Iowa, and you have done some professional experiences and research in the Chesapeake Bay region.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to what Brother Leggett said. There's over 600 like-minded organizations, and he's probably touched all of them in some way, shape, or form. But specifically, I would just Google Chesapeake Bay. I know that sounds so simple, but Google Chesapeake Bay and find out if there's an organization in your area, in your neighborhood that can help you. I know some of the larger organizations, and that doesn't mean just because they're larger that you can't find other organizations. But as Mr. Leggett said, the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, the Chesapeake Bay Commission, the Chesapeake Bay Conservancy, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, the Chesapeake Research Consortium, the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and then I'm a federal employee, so I think there are over 19 federal partners that have worked in the Chesapeake Bay in and of itself. So there are so many opportunities, but I literally would say, start in your own backyard. Start with your zip code and just Google and see if there's anything that you can do about different aspects of the Chesapeake Bay. Yes, we want each and every one of us to be a part of that, but let's just be honest, some of us may not necessarily be within, steps of the Chesapeake Bay in and of itself. What we've learned statistically is that most African Americans and most Americans live within 1 hour of a body of water. So what that means is that we have more and more people moving to the coastlines. And so you often hear people say, oh, well, some of the fastest growing areas are the Miamis of the world and the Houstons of the world. But guess what? This mid-Atlantic region of the Chesapeake Bay is also a very highly sought after area. And so that means you're going to have people like me, people who move to the area and may not know that much about the Chesapeake Bay. And that's why we need organizations like BIMS to talk about marine science, about conservation, and what every one of us can do to, again, advance these important topics. So that would be just a few of my suggestions is, for lack of a better term, Google it. And I'm sure you'll find a lot of information, more information than you thought was available.
Look, I Google stuff all the time when I'm trying to do something new in the lab. Ooh, Google. I want to thank you both. Before as a final word, we earlier this week, we asked our social media followers, what is the importance of the Chesapeake Bay watershed? And I just wanted to read one of the answers. I thank everybody, though, who did provide answers or engaged with us on our social media platforms. And I think this one just resonates the most. Someone said, watersheds are important in communities because they act as water collection points before the water flows into the ocean and other larger major bodies of water. In terms of the Chesapeake Bay watershed, it is a huge watershed. We've talked about it being the largest estuary in North America with so much biodiversity and provides a great introduction to nature and marine life. It also spans several states, which can create collaborations between states and policymakers when it comes to our waterways. Again, I want to thank everyone who has tuned in for our BIMS Dives. Please join us next month as we dive into another area with another expert. I also have to take time to thank you, Dr. Boyd and Mr. Leggett, for being a part of this, for engaging with me as well as our BIMS community. And I look forward to talking and speaking with you all in the future.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure to be with you tonight. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.